Hi everyone, this is Sharon. Today I have a custom journal to share with you. This is a journal I made for Cynthia, and she had requested a journal that had a vintage and botanical feel to it. So that's what I created for her. I wrapped it up with this golden brown sari silk ribbon, and then I've got a couple of charms that I hung on to the ribbon. And I just wrapped that around a few times. For the cover of the journal, I use this beautiful old book from the 1880s. It's green. She mentioned green was one of her favorite colors, so I thought this was perfect. And it's got this beautiful gold embossing on it. And this is the spine. I wrapped a little bit of lace around there, and that's the back side. It's got 5 signatures. I will put the dimensions and the number of pages down in the description of the video. So heading on to the inside, this book had some really beautiful inside covers that I didn't want to cover up. They've got this floral pattern on there, so I just left that as is and added this book plate. And then on the back, similar, and I just added a label to the bottom of that. For the inside of my spine, I used this beautiful old French ticking fabric. The pages, I used a number of different digital artists and digital kits. I used quite a few images from Twisted Paper Studios' Ancient Emerald kit. I will link that down below. I really like the colors in there, and it fit perfectly with this journal. So on this first page, I embellished it with this grosgrain ribbon and a velvet ribbon over the top of that, and then I just added a wax seal onto it. On this page, I have a fabric flip with this beautiful old piece of linen, and it's got some nice lace on the bottom. And then under there, I just tucked in this vintage French postcard. This is what the page looks like behind. I've used a number of old book pages in here as well. Here, I just folded it up and added some ribbon to the bottom of my little tuck there. And then in there, I created this journaling card. And here I folded over and created a little side tuck on the back. And then in there, I've inserted a couple of full calling cards that I made. And I just backed those with some vintage handwritten paper. I've used a number of pages from some botanical books that I have. Here on this page, I created this piece from a vintage French envelope. I like all the stamps on there, and I just used that as my cover, lined the inside, and then added some papers and some journaling space on the inside. Here I created a fabric pocket, added some lace to that, and then I created this little tag with a pocket. So I added this pocket here and then tucked in a couple of pieces of my pressed lavender. And I just think that makes a nice bouquet with the flowers in the background. And then on the back, I added some more of that paper from the book. Here in this pocket, I've got this little piece that I made. It's a little holder. This is the pretty image on this side. And then I lined it with some coffee dyed paper for writing on the inside. And then I just tucked in this piece of antique ledger paper. This is a digital from a floral book. Here I created a top tuck, and in there I've got this image from Ruby and Pearl, and it makes a nice journaling sheet. I just did some stenciling on the back side. This is an old French book page. And then here I've got this corner tuck that I created, and then in there I just added a little bit of sari silk to my clip, and then added this antique photo. I've got a number of botanical digitals that I got from the public domain that I added in here. Here on this page, I just added this cluster of lace and fabric and a label to that. And then on the inside of the signature, I've got a couple of top tucks, and then in there I've got these tags that I made. Some beautiful floral images. I believe those came from Raindrop Lila. And then for the bases of my tags, I used some old time cards and some vintage stamps. I clipped this lady to the top of my page, and then here's another tag. And I also added some lace and some wool fabric to these tags. Punch the bottoms. This is another ruby and pearl image, and I just brought my pocket from this side. I've got this old linen piece with the lace on for my pocket. I just brought it around and then attached it with some decorative stitching on the side of the page. And then that's what the page looks like. And then in that pocket, I've got this piece that I pulled out of an old typing book from the 1920s or 30s, I believe that was. It's got some handwritten notes on the back, just like the font on there. And then I also tucked in this page from an antique French book. Beautiful image. Here on this botanical image, I added this floral tab. And then here I've got this wonderful old piece of Italian, it's an Italian document page. And I believe it said it was from 1747, so quite old. And then I folded that up to create a pocket on that side of the page and then tucked in this tag. This is an avocado dyed doily at the top. And I did some stenciling on the back with paste. Here on this page, I just created kind of a secret pocket. I took a portion of the page and glued it down over the top to create that little pocket. And then in there, I've got this little tally card. Nice little vintage piece. Here on this page, I love this beautiful digital. I think this one might be from Everlasting Journals, one of her latest kits. And what I did was I took this thin piece of black velvet ribbon and made that into a belly band and added a button to the bottom of that. And then in there, I tucked this vintage envelope. I kind of resized it and then stitched it down again. And then on the back side, I just added a little floral sticker. And then in there, I tucked a few journaling cards that I made. This one. Here I created this narrow embossed belly band, and in there I tucked this antique French postcard in an old French book page. And then here's the other side of that Italian document, and I left the sides open so you could take a peek at the beautiful handwriting on the inside. And then I've got another tag. Love that signature. This is a page from a French embroidery book that I have. I just added a lace tab onto that page. And then on this side in my pocket, I did a little punching along the side, so I brought this side of the page in and punched it and left it loose to kind of add a little dimension and interest. And then I've got this little folder that I made from Edith Holden book page. I just added some of my watercolor swatches to the top of that. And then in there, I've got this piece of paper for journaling. And then this was the front page of the book that I used. It's got the person's name and address very faintly on there, and then it says Christmas 1889, even though I think the book did say that it was from 1881. This is a beautiful eco-dyed page, and I just added this kind of mushroom-colored velvet ribbon to the side. I love the way that it kind of blends in with the colors there. And then on this old antique music I used for my book page, I clipped on a piece of Italian document from the 1800s. And then I've got this old French photo from a photo album that I purchased. And then on this side, I clipped on this piece that I made. So I just tied it up with some string. And I used an old book page from the Ladies Monthly Museum book. It's one that I have, and it's from, I believe, the late 1800s. So I wrapped this around a few times, and then I added this vintage stamp to the back. This is an Art House Whimsy lady in her hat, and I just added some photo corners to that. And then on the inside, I added this pressed flower, some hydrangeas from my garden. So I think it's just a fun little place to tuck a photo or a note or something. Here on this side of the page, I did some stenciling with paste, and then that flips out. And then I've got this little journaling page. This is a Botanical from Ruby and Pearl. And then I just did some Mod Podge on the back of this napkin image. Love this beautiful floral, and I just added this little punched paper piece at the bottom. And then in this pocket on this side, I've got a beautiful old French receipt from 1875. It's got some wonderful kind of raised embossed seals on there. I just love that piece. And then I also inserted this little booklet that I made. It's kind of like a folder. I took a French postcard that I had and used that for my front cover. And then in there, I tucked this little piece, a Raindrop Lila photo image that I waxed, and then some vintage paper, and I just added a little lace on there. And then I took some of my Edith Holden book pages and made a couple of little tags that I tucked in here. And this is what the back is that I lined it with. And then I just added some little pockets with my offcuts from my time cards. Here on this page, I made this tab with this dark green velvet fabric, and then I just added a little lace on there. And then here I've got this bottom corner tuck with these beautiful ladies. And in there, I've got a page from one of my Botanical books. I love the way the greens and browns go with the ladies' outfits. There's a little bit of journaling space on the back of that. And then I also created this bookmark. Page from one of my butterfly books. On this page, I created a pocket with this beautiful old lace. And then I've got this kind of brown and cream background on there. And then in there, I tucked a couple of pieces. I've got a vintage book on Paris photography. So there's some images here. I added a laundry label to the bottom of that. And then I also took another one of those book pages and made this triptych. I love the colors in this photo. And then on the back, I just lined it with some music paper. And then I took these strips of fabric to reconnect the three pieces and added some little faux buttons. And then I've got these little kind of tabs at the top. This page is a page from a kit from Tailor Made Journals. It's a sampler kit. And what I did was I printed the page twice, and then I cut out all these little fabric samples and kind of crinkled them up and aged them with some ink, and then re-glued them back down to give it a little bit of texture and dimension. And then I also added a lace piece on there again to give it a little texture. And then on this side of the page, I've got this vintage ticket that I used for my side tuck. And then I created this journaling card with this lady. Just pinned her on with these rusty pins onto some vintage fabric, and then some vintage paper on the back side. Here again, I've got a corner tuck with this beautiful image, and I just embellished that a bit with some book page. And then in there, I've got a page from a French botanical book that I have. I don't know how old it is. I think it's from the early 1900s. It's Le Petit Jardin. Nice page. And then I also have this tag that I made. This beautiful botanical image. Backed it with some sewing instruction paper. And then this is a paint chip sample that I embossed. And then on this side, I've got another botanical image. And our last page, I added a little bit of embossed paper and this beautiful gold ribbon on there. And that is our flip through. I usually forget to mention this, but on my strings in the center signature, I've just added a couple of glass beads to the bottom of that. So I thank you very much for coming along with me today. I appreciate you being here. And until next time, bye-bye.